And I want you to decide if I'm being tolerant or not. Okay? Marmite is disgusting. I wonder if you think that's a tolerant thing to say or an intolerant thing. And how do you even decide? Arsenal football team are rubbish. Tolerant, not tolerant. There is no God. Is that tolerant or intolerant? Homosexuality is wrong. Islam is a false religion. I wonder, do you think these are tolerant or intolerant things? And how do you even decide? Okay, it wasn't the funnest game ever invented. How do you decide? I want to try and suggest to you a definition of tolerance that means that all of the things I've just said may not be intolerant. Let me try and explain. Tolerance, I'm going to talk about two different types of tolerance. The first type of tolerance is a noble, wonderful, magnificent thing to pursue. The second type of tolerance is a shambolic, shabby, fake thing, which is a rubbish way to live your life. A noble tolerance and a sham tolerance. What's the difference between the two? Okay, I want to just stick with this again, see if you can get your head around this. I tried to explain this to my wife last night and she didn't get it, so I hope it makes sense to you. Noble tolerance is a tolerance that says, I think you're wrong, but I respect you and accept you. I want to try and suggest that is a noble thing to pursue. It's famously summed up by the quote you may well have heard. It's wrongly ascribed to Voltaire, where he said, he didn't say, I don't like what you're saying, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it. Okay? So noble tolerance is saying, I think you're wrong, but I accept you. The problem in our culture is that that sort of tolerance has shifted. It's shifted now to not simply saying, I accept you as a person, but think you're wrong. Tolerance often now is defined as, I accept you and I accept your view as equally valid. Do you see the shift that's happened? So over here, noble tolerance means I accept the person. The tolerance that our culture is shifting towards now is I accept your view as utterly valid and equal to mine. I want to suggest that this one is noble, this one is rubbish. I'll try and show you why. There's a big problem with this view, the view of sham tolerance. For a start, it's intellectually shambolic. It makes no sense. It makes no sense to say that all views are equally valid. It makes no sense that you can never say you're wrong to someone. Because if I say you're wrong, and you say you can't say that because you're being intolerant and that makes you wrong, you can see the problem, can't you? It doesn't work. This tolerance over here intellectually suppresses truth. It suppresses intellectual conversation. It suppresses good debate and argument and discussion. And it also is a rubbish basis for relationship. Because it means we can never be honest with each other. And I want to suggest that there is a type of tolerance where I can say, I think you are utterly, utterly wrong. And I love you. And I accept you. That is the sort of tolerance that I want to propose. And that is the tolerance where truth is essential. Right. I don't know when you last went trampolining. I love trampolining. Although I had my 40th birthday 2 weeks ago. I fear that my trampolining days may be over. But I love trampolining, and one of the principles, I don't know much about trampolining, but one of the principles is that you need springs on either side of the trampoline in order for it to work. There needs to be, the trampoline bed bit is held in tension between these two springs. And I want to suggest that in true noble tolerance, there is a tension between truth and grace. And you need both of them in order for tolerance to truly flourish. I'm going to read you a sentence. This book is part of the Bible. It's John's Gospel, packaged as a book called Uncover. Let me read you from the very first chapter. Just listen to this description of Jesus. It says this. It says, Jesus came from the Father. So that's a claim that Jesus is not just any old man. He's come from God. He's the Son of God. He's come from the Father. Listen to this. Full of grace and truth. That's who Jesus is. Jesus is described as being full of grace and full of truth. That is what makes him the most tolerant man who's ever lived. By tolerant, I mean noble tolerance, not this tolerance. You see, everybody in this room will tend towards one side or the other of grace and truth. One of the springs will pull us more strongly than the other. Some of us have got strong truth springs. If you've got strong truth springs, what will that result in your life? It will make you harsh. It will make you cruel. It will make you arrogant. It will make you someone who says, you're wrong. You want to win the fight. You want to win the argument. You want to prove that you're right. That's what happens if your truth springs are too strong. But some of us have grace springs that are too strong. And if our grace springs are too strong, what happens is we say, oh, well, I don't want to offend anyone. I don't want to, I'll just keep quiet. I'll just be nice. Let's just be nice. I'll be nice all the time. I'll say nice things. I don't want to disagree with anyone. I'll never disagree. I'll never say anything that's hard. And so you see someone and their flies are down, and the truth person goes, your flies are down, like that. The grace person goes, oh, I can't say anything. Yeah? I hope this is making some sense, all right? Grace and truth. If you abandon either of those two things, you don't end up with tolerance. You end up with an intellectual mush. You end up with a pathetic thing that is not robust, and it doesn't enable us to have proper discussions and conversations. So let me just trace through and show you some of the ways that works out in this life of this man, Jesus. Now, I get that for some of us, we're still checking this stuff out. We're working out. We've been invited to come here today. We're not sure what we believe about Jesus. That's okay. That's really cool. That's why we've come, all right? We want to have a look. Let's have a listen to some of the stuff that he said. What does grace and truth in action look like? Okay, well, there's an amazing time when some people brought a woman to Jesus, and they had strong truth springs. Listen to their truth springs, right? At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing them. Can you feel the truth springs? Pulling. Look at her. Condemning, pointing the finger. Look, she's bad. Listen to Jesus. Yeah, you got this. This is great. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. Can you imagine? It must have been slightly bizarre, mustn't it? They're expecting Jesus, this great teacher, to say something wise, and he just bends over on the ground and starts drawing pictures in the sand. They must have been, what is he doing? Well, look. They kept on questioning. He straightens up and he said, "Let any one of you who's without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. Do you see the grace? Here's a woman who has been caught in the act of adultery. She's been doing something which the law said was wrong. Jesus says, "I don't condemn you, go." Grace, such grace. But before you think his grace springs are outpulling the truth, listen to what he says next. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Your life was wrong. That's not intolerant. That is perfect tolerance. Where Jesus says, your life is wrong, what you believe, what you're doing is wrong, but I accept you. I show grace to you. Grace and truth. And I want to suggest that is where true tolerance can be found. As you go on through John's Gospel, Jesus says some very hard things. In some places, Jesus says things like, he says to some of people opposing him, "Your father is the devil." That's quite a harsh thing to say, right? And yet we know that Jesus is full of grace and truth. And even as he speaks that, he speaks it in grace. And on it goes. And how do we know? Ultimately, because this book ends up with the most supreme act of grace and truth. Where grace and truth, those two springs, they pulled Jesus apart. As Jesus was taken and he was nailed to a cross, with grace in one hand and truth in the other, Jesus was pinned out on a cross. And he said, "Because I love these people." Here's the claim at the heart of Christianity, right? Here is the claim. Forget tolerance and stuff for a second. I just want to tell you what's at the heart of what it means to be a Christian. Here's the heart of it. Jesus comes, he says, your life is wrong. You're living wrong. You are wrong. You are wrong. He speaks truth to us. You've ignored the God who made you. He speaks truth. He speaks truth. And then he says, there's his truth springs, pulling. And then he says, and because I love you so much, I will go to a cross and die. And take the punishment that you deserve. That's true tolerance. That is the true measure of what tolerance looks like. You're wrong and I love you. And I will lay down my life for you. I want to suggest that is a stunningly beautiful way to live your life. You're wrong and I love you. And that's what Jesus told his followers then to do. Jesus said, love your enemies. Love them. So I want to tell you that I have seen many examples where Christians have got this wrong. Where Christians have been intolerant. Where they have spoken truth, but there's been no grace. That's happened. Jesus never did that. But sometimes we do. And some of you may have experienced that. Some of you may have experienced harsh, graceless Christians. Don't reject Jesus just because of some of his followers are muppets. But some of you may have experienced grace-filled Christians, but who would never tell you the truth. And I want to say to you, true love is seen in that. Truth and grace. And I want to encourage you to pursue that. So let's go back to my examples at the start. Is it possible for me to say to someone, you're wrong? Is it possible even for me to say to someone, I want to persuade you that you're wrong and I'm right? Yeah, I think that's possible. if there's a pull of grace, a pull of love on my heart. And even those who like Marmite, I can show love to, grace. Now I get that these are difficult things. And our culture wants to settle for the sham tolerance and wants to tell us, stop telling us you're wrong. But I'm not going to stop telling people that I think they're wrong. Because that's what I'm called to do if I believe something is true. So let's take the question of, is there a God or not? That is either true or it's not. Let's not have this stupid sham thing where we go, well, you believe that and I believe that and that's fine. Let's just agree to disagree. No, let's not. Let's love each other and talk about it and debate it and intellectually engage with it. That is much more satisfying. You know, did Jesus rise from the dead or not? Look, either he did or he didn't. This is not difficult to understand. It's either true or it's not. And there's no point us just going, well, that's fine. You believe it's true, I don't believe it's true, let's just leave it at that. No, I'm convinced it's true. I'm convinced it's the most important historical fact in all of eternity. So of course I'm going to try and persuade you it's true. But I'm not going to hate you while I do it. I love you. See, that is the difference. I'm not going to cut off your head if you disagree with me. I'm going to love you. I'm not going to hate you and ignore you and ostracize you and abuse you if you disagree. You see, that's true tolerance. And that is a truly tolerant culture where we can disagree with one another, where we can but we can love each other. And we can have proper discussions and proper arguments. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break and we're going to have a chance to put this into practice, lovingly and kindly. And we're going to ask some questions. So if you've got questions, then you can either text them in, or if you can't be bothered to text, then you can just ask them with your voice, the old-fashioned way. So why don't we just take a couple of minutes? Let's keep those things in mind, and then let's ask some questions and let's engage.
Great. So sorry to cut in there. We're going to come back together for some question and answers. Please do keep texting in your questions. The numbers you need is round the pillars. But first of all, does anyone have a question from the floor? If you do, just stick up a hand and there'll be a mic that will come round. Oh, yeah, one there. It might not be turned on.
Thanks for the talk. My question is, you mentioned that Jesus is the pinnacle of noble tolerance. Do you think that the idea of noble tolerance is compatible with eternal punishment? Because against people who do not believe Christianity, because that seems to me to be quite a strong level of intolerance. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. So let me just make sure I've got the question right. So the question is, how does tolerance fit with punishment? You know, if Jesus says, but if you don't believe in me, then you're going to be punished, that doesn't sound very tolerant. Yeah? Yeah, and I think that the idea of tolerance has to sit alongside the idea of justice. So for example, justice lies at the heart of God. God does what is right according to the Bible. And that is why punishment always follows crime, sin, right? So, in just the same way that in our situation today, a courtroom, if someone is guilty of a crime and the judge says, But look, I'm a tolerant judge. I'll let you off. That isn't tolerance, that's injustice. Yeah? Now, intolerance would be, I hate you because I hate car thieves, because someone nicked my car once. And therefore, I'm going to punish you more severely than you deserve. That would be intolerance. But tolerance, a tolerant judge, would be a judge who deals justly and fairly with what's put in front of him. Now, what makes Jesus extraordinary is that Jesus goes one stage further, and he actually says to people, you deserve punishment, but I will give my life to save you. Trust me and you can be saved. That seems to me to be very, very generous offer. Now, if someone then turns to Jesus and says, I don't want it, I don't want to trust in you, I don't believe, and I hate you, it is not intolerant then for them to then face the punishment that they have chosen. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm trying to help you see that tolerance is all to do with having that love and truth. Yeah, rather than the harshness. So I don't think you ever discover Jesus being harsh with people. In fact, I would argue that you would never, according to the way the Bible presents God, God is never a harsh God. In fact, the standard, kind of like when God describes who he is, he says, I am slow to anger and abounding in love. I'm patient. I'm not like that as a dad. I've got 3 boys, 12, 10, and 8. Man, that's where your tolerance really gets tested. It's like they're fighting one another. I am not slow to anger. And sometimes I will react harshly towards my boys because I'm intolerant. But God is perfectly tolerant, which means he acts with patience and love and generosity towards people. But he doesn't leave the guilty unpunished. And those who continue to choose to reject him, he ultimately will punish. Yeah.
Thank
So that was a
you.
long answer.
Would anyone like to come back on that? Or if anyone else has a question from the floor, stick up a hand. Okay, great. We'll go for one texted in.
There's one.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go for it. Oh, sorry. There's a mic coming around just so we can hear you.
All right. This kind of just came out of, well, it didn't come out of nowhere, but I haven't really thought about how to phrase it. So when Jesus takes a punishment from you, to what extent is that injustice?
To what extent is that injustice?
Right, yeah, because you said he goes a step further. So is it just for one person to take the punishment of another?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, I get that we've all got different understandings and different places we're coming from. Just go with this, okay? Go with the fact. Let's go with there is a God. He's a good God who created the world, and all of humanity has rejected him. Okay, I know we're not all on the same page, but let's say that that's true. There's a God, and all of humanity has rejected him. If he punished all of humanity, that would be fair, right? That would be just. That's not unjust. Yeah, that would be fair. But the problem is that God is not only just, he's also loving. So he loves the people that he's made. And so God finds a way in order to be both just, or truth, and grace. He finds a way to do what is right and loving. And the way he does it is by sending his son Jesus to take the punishment. Now, your question, is that just? I have to say, it's one of the questions that it's hard to get my head around. How can it be just? Because sometimes take the courtroom scene, right? Supposing you were found guilty, I was found guilty of murder. Let's be more friendly. Supposing I was found guilty of murder, and the judge said you're guilty, and you came in and said, I'll go to prison for him. I don't think the judge would go, great, terrific, off you go. He'd be like, no, that's not the way it works. So I understand that there's a weird thing going on there. And yet, and this is where we're getting slightly technical. I apologize if we're getting too technical. What the Bible says happened when Jesus died on the cross is not that just Jesus was punished. Actually, what happened was my wrongdoing was transferred to him. So he became sin. He became the sinner. He became the criminal. So in that courtroom thing, it would have to be that you actually became the murderer. Now, we can't get our heads around how that could happen in that scenario, but God has made a way for this to happen. It's the transfer of my sin to him, which is his. Then is what I'm arguing is his grace that he would do that. Now that may not satisfy us entirely. Well, how can that be just? Well, it can be just because that is how God has designed it to be, and he's provided that way.
Great. Maybe time for one more question. Does anyone have a burning question? Stick a hand up if you do. Okay, let's go for one texted in then. So how can Jesus negate the Old Testament law which says that adultery should be punished by not punishing the woman? Doesn't that count as grace without truth?
Yes, it does. Yes, that would be a shocking thing for Jesus to do. Except that her adultery is going to be punished. Which brings us right back to where we were just 2 seconds ago. The whole reason Jesus came was so that punishment would fall on him, not on the guilty. So when Jesus looks this woman in the eye and says, I don't condemn you, it is because he is going to die on the cross in her place. So Jesus is not saying adultery doesn't matter. He's saying it really matters. It deserves the punishment of God, but Jesus says, but I don't condemn you because I will be condemned. That's how passionately, that's why Jesus is full of grace and truth. How else could he do it? Otherwise, he'd have to go, no, you're guilty, I'm going to stone you to death. That's truth, but it's got no grace. Here's the, I was going to say magic of Jesus. That's not quite right, not magic, it's cool. Here's the beauty of Jesus. He can show those two things together because of the cross. And it doesn't make sense until you see Jesus die on the cross. And then you go, there it is. That's grace and truth.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for.